You belong in the kitchen, not at our table." The words sliced through the elegant silence more sharply than the crystal glasses clinking beneath the golden chandeliers. Conversations froze in place. A violinist near the ballroom stage hesitated for half a heartbeat before continuing the melody. Every head slowly turned toward the center table inside the Grand Regent Hotel in New York City, where one of the most influential families in American business had just transformed a prestigious charity gala into an unforgettable spectacle. Richard Harrison, the white billionaire chairman of Harrison Industries, leaned comfortably against the back of his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who had spent decades believing the world moved according to his decisions. Beside him sat his wife, Victoria Harrison, wearing an elegant emerald evening gown and an expression that suggested she had already judged everyone in the room before the appetizers had even arrived. Across from them, their son Logan Harrison adjusted the cuff of his custom tuxedo before smiling at the uncomfortable silence spreading across the ballroom. In front of the Harrison family stood Claire Jackson, a black waitress wearing a neatly pressed restaurant uniform and a perfectly tied black apron. She balanced a polished silver serving tray with steady hands while maintaining the same calm expression she had carried throughout the evening. She neither argued nor lowered her eyes. Her composure only seemed to irritate Logan even more. "Did you not hear my father?" he asked with a light laugh that encouraged several nearby guests to smile awkwardly. "We asked for sparkling water 10 minutes ago. If this is too difficult, perhaps someone else should be serving tonight." A few people quietly chuckled, eager to remain on good terms with the family whose company employed thousands of people across the country. Others looked away, pretending to study the menu because they understood that witnessing humiliation was uncomfortable, especially when no one was willing to interrupt it. Claire simply nodded politely. "I apologize for the delay, sir. I will bring it immediately." Her voice was calm, respectful, and almost surprisingly gentle. There was no anger hidden beneath it, no bitterness, no attempt to defend herself. She turned gracefully toward the service station without rushing, her polished shoes making almost no sound across the marble floor. Behind her, Logan shook his head with a smirk. "People have forgotten what professionalism looks like." Richard smiled faintly before lifting his wine glass. "That is because too many people are given opportunities they have not earned." The comments drifted through the ballroom like cold air. Some guests laughed politely. Others remained silent, sensing that something about the evening suddenly felt different. Claire reached the service station and carefully poured sparkling water into a crystal bottle. As she placed the bottle onto her tray, her phone vibrated once inside the pocket beneath her apron. She did not remove it. She did not even glance downward. A second vibration followed only a few seconds later. Then a third. Each notification arrived quietly, unnoticed by everyone except Claire herself. She continued arranging the glasses with remarkable precision before returning toward the Harrison table with the same composed pace. Around the ballroom, executives discussed mergers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Investors compared market forecasts, and television reporters prepared interviews celebrating Harrison Industries' latest expansion. Tonight's gala was intended to celebrate another year of extraordinary corporate success. Enormous digital screens displayed the company's achievements, while photographers captured smiling executives shaking hands beneath elegant lighting. Everything appeared perfect. Yet hidden inside Claire's apron pocket rested a phone, receiving confirmation after confirmation from attorneys, investment bankers, and financial advisors scattered across Manhattan. Documents had been signed. Regulatory approvals had been completed. Wire transfers had cleared. Every notification represented another completed step in a transaction that had quietly reached its final stage only minutes earlier. Claire knew exactly what each message meant, but her expression never changed. She returned to the Harrison family, gently poured sparkling water into Richard's glass, then Victoria's, then Logan's, thanking each of them with the same professionalism she had shown every other guest that evening. Logan barely looked at her. "At least you finally managed that," he muttered before turning back toward a group of investors discussing the company's future. Claire offered a polite smile and stepped away once again. No one noticed the almost invisible notification light glowing inside her apron pocket. No one realized that while the Harrison family celebrated an empire they believed would remain theirs forever, The most important business transaction of the night had already been completed, and the quiet waitress they had just humiliated was the only person in the ballroom who already knew exactly how the evening was about to end. Claire Jackson continued moving through the ballroom with the same quiet professionalism that had defined every minute of her shift. She greeted guests with a warm smile, collected empty plates with practiced precision, and thanked every table as though nothing unusual had happened only moments earlier. To everyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what they believed she was. A hardworking waitress doing her best to serve one of the most powerful families in New York. That illusion remained perfectly intact because Claire had spent years learning that true confidence rarely needed an audience. Across the Grand Regent Hotel, conversations slowly returned, although many guests continued glancing toward the Harrison family's table. Richard Harrison remained the unquestioned center of attention. Investors eagerly laughed at his stories about billion-dollar acquisitions. Television reporters waited patiently for the evening's keynote speech. Young entrepreneurs hoped for a brief handshake that might change their careers. Harrison Industries represented success itself. Its headquarters dominated the Manhattan skyline. Its factories operated across multiple states. Financial magazines regularly described Richard as one of the country's most disciplined business leaders. Few people questioned his judgment because wealth often creates an illusion of permanent authority. Victoria Harrison quietly adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist while complimenting the ballroom decorations. Logan Harrison confidently discussed expansion plans with several venture capital executives, describing new international partnerships that he expected would double company revenue within 3 years. They spoke about the future with absolute certainty because none of them imagined that ownership itself had already changed hands. Claire passed nearby carrying another polished silver tray filled with sparkling water and freshly prepared desserts. Her phone vibrated once again beneath the pocket hidden behind her neatly pressed black apron. Then it vibrated again only seconds later. This time she gently excused herself from a nearby table before stepping into a quiet service hallway just beyond the ballroom doors. The hallway was simple compared to the luxury outside. Stainless steel preparation counters lined one wall, while catering staff quietly organized trays for the next course. Claire finally removed her phone from her apron pocket. The screen displayed another series of secure notifications. The first confirmed final regulatory approval. The second confirmed successful settlement of the transaction. The third contained a short message from her lead attorney. Congratulations. The acquisition is officially complete. Harrison Industries now belongs to Jackson Capital Holdings. Claire looked at the message for only a brief moment before locking the screen again. She took one slow breath, smiled almost imperceptibly, then slipped the phone back into her pocket. There was no celebration, no dramatic reaction, no triumphant expression. Years of discipline had taught her that the most important victories rarely needed witnesses. As she returned toward the ballroom, her manager hurried over looking slightly nervous. "Claire, the Harrison table requested you again," he said quietly. "Please try to keep them happy. They are our biggest donors tonight." Claire answered with the same calm smile she had shown all evening. Of course. She walked back into the golden light beneath the crystal chandeliers as soft piano music drifted across the room. The applause began as Richard Harrison approached the stage to prepare for his keynote address. Cameras immediately turned toward him while photographers adjusted their lenses. Behind the applause, Claire continued serving guests unnoticed, her movements graceful and unhurried. Nobody watching the event could have imagined that the quiet waitress moving between the tables had just completed one of the largest private acquisitions in recent corporate history. The Harrison family believed they were celebrating another year of leadership, another year of control, another year of unquestioned authority. Yet every confident smile, every ambitious speech, and every public congratulations rested upon a reality that had already disappeared. The paperwork had been signed before sunset. The funds had already transferred. The ownership records had already changed. Only one person inside the ballroom knew that the celebration had quietly become a farewell, and she continued carrying her serving tray with the same dignity that no amount of wealth had ever been able to purchase. Richard Harrison stepped onto the ballroom stage beneath a row of brilliant crystal chandeliers as confident applause filled every corner of the Grand Regent Hotel. The enormous digital screen behind him displayed the Harrison Industries logo in brilliant blue and silver, while photographers captured every smile, every handshake, and every carefully rehearsed moment. He welcomed investors, board members, executives, elected officials, and charity sponsors with the polished confidence of someone who had delivered hundreds of speeches over the course of his career. Tonight, he began, raising his glass. We celebrate not only another successful year, but the future of a company built on discipline, vision, and strong leadership. More applause echoed through the ballroom. Logan Harrison stood proudly beside the stage, greeting shareholders with effortless confidence, while Victoria Harrison exchanged elegant smiles with influential guests seated near the front. Around the room, conversations turned toward future acquisitions, expanding markets, and ambitious growth. Projections. Everyone spoke as though tomorrow had already been guaranteed. Claire Jackson quietly continued serving dessert along the outer edge of the ballroom. She carefully placed porcelain plates before guests, thanked each table with genuine warmth, and moved gracefully between conversations that barely acknowledged her presence. Every few minutes, her phone vibrated softly inside the pocket beneath her neatly pressed black apron, but she never reached for it. She already knew what every new message contained. Final confirmations. Internal notifications. Congratulations from attorneys, financial advisors, and senior executives who had spent nearly 18 months arranging a transaction so confidential that even Harrison Industries' own leadership had never suspected it was taking place. Claire had insisted on complete discretion from the very beginning. No interviews, no publicity, no leaked documents, no speculation. The acquisition had been structured through Jackson Capital Holdings, an investment company almost no one associated with her because almost no one had ever seen its founder. She preferred it that way. Wealth attracted attention. Privacy protected freedom. While guests applauded another optimistic prediction from Richard Harrison, Claire briefly noticed one elderly janitor struggling to move a heavy supply cart through a narrow hallway entrance. Without hesitation, she quietly stepped away from the ballroom, helped him guide the cart through the doorway, thanked him with a warm smile, and returned to the dining floor before anyone important realized she had disappeared. The janitor smiled gratefully and whispered, "Thank you, young lady." Claire answered simply, "Everyone deserves a little help." She resumed serving the ballroom exactly where she had left off. Nearby, one of the hotel's younger servers watched the exchange with admiration. "You always help everyone," she quietly said while arranging coffee cups. Claire smiled gently. Kindness costs less than pride. Those words lingered with the young employee long after Claire walked away. Inside the ballroom, Richard Harrison concluded another section of his speech by thanking his family for protecting the company's legacy across generations. Logan received another round of applause while confidently discussing Harrison Industries' future with several investment bankers seated near the front row. None of them noticed the discreet arrival of two sharply dressed attorneys entering through the ballroom's side entrance carrying slim black document cases. They spoke quietly with the event coordinator before taking seats near the rear of the room without drawing attention to themselves. Claire recognized both of them immediately. They had attended dozens of confidential meetings together over the previous year. Neither attorney looked toward her. Neither offered the slightest acknowledgement. Professional confidentiality demanded complete silence until the scheduled moment arrived. Claire appreciated that discipline because it reflected her own. She calmly collected another empty glass from the Harrison table just as Logan dismissed her with a casual wave of his hand without making eye contact. Richard continued speaking confidently about ownership, leadership, and responsibility while the audience applauded once again. Yet hidden behind those elegant words stood a reality that had already changed forever. The attorneys had arrived precisely on schedule. The documents inside their briefcases carried signatures that could not be reversed. The board members waiting elsewhere in Manhattan had already received official notice. Government filings had been accepted. Financial institutions had completed every transfer. The celebration unfolding beneath the crystal chandeliers remained beautiful, expensive, and perfectly organized, but beneath its polished surface the foundation had already shifted, and only the quiet waitress carrying a silver tray understood that the next few minutes would transform every life inside the ballroom. Claire Jackson moved quietly through the ballroom, as Richard Harrison accepted another standing ovation beneath the dazzling crystal chandeliers. Every smile surrounding the stage reflected certainty. Every handshake celebrated a future the Harrison family believed they still controlled. Investors congratulated Logan Harrison on the company's next expansion. Reporters prepared questions about international growth. Television cameras slowly swept across the audience, capturing polished speeches and confident faces. The atmosphere felt carefully choreographed, as though success itself had become another elegant decoration inside the Grand Regent Hotel. Claire carried a silver coffee service between the tables with the same steady grace she had shown all evening. Her neatly pressed black uniform and clean black apron blended naturally into the background, while expensive conversations flowed around her. She thanked each guest politely, refreshed coffee cups, replaced dessert forks, and quietly disappeared before anyone thought to remember her face. That invisibility had once been something life forced upon her. Tonight, it had become her greatest advantage. Her phone vibrated once more beneath the hidden pocket inside her apron. This time she glanced briefly at the screen while standing inside the service corridor. The newest message came directly from the lead attorney. The board representatives have arrived. The official announcement will begin once Mr. Harrison concludes his remarks. Claire locked the phone immediately and slipped it back into her pocket. Her heartbeat remained steady. She had waited nearly 2 years for this evening, not because she wanted revenge, but because she believed leadership should be measured by character rather than entitlement. 18 months earlier, Jackson Capital Holdings had quietly begun purchasing Harrison Industries shares through a series of completely legal transactions spread across multiple institutional investors. Every acquisition had followed federal regulations. Every disclosure requirement had been met. Every signature had been reviewed by independent counsel. Claire had personally instructed her legal team to avoid unnecessary publicity because she wanted the transaction completed before anyone realized what was happening. The process required extraordinary patience. She attended strategy meetings during the mornings, reviewed financial documents late into the evenings, and still worked several restaurant shifts each week without revealing her identity to anyone. Not because she needed the income anymore, but because the restaurant reminded her of the people who were too often overlooked. She never wanted success to separate her from ordinary kindness. Returning to the ballroom, Claire noticed several hotel employees watching Richard Harrison's speech from behind a service station. One young dishwasher quietly whispered that he wished he could someday work for a company as successful as Harrison Industries. Another employee smiled and replied that people like them rarely received opportunities inside places like that. Claire heard every word but continued walking without interrupting. Their conversation strengthened her resolve more than they could possibly imagine. She believed companies became truly successful only when every employee felt respected, from the executive office to the loading dock. On stage, Richard lifted his glass once again. "Our greatest achievement has always been our people," he declared proudly. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Claire paused for the briefest moment beside the ballroom entrance. The words echoed through the room, yet only she knew how different the company might soon become. Respect was easy to mention during a speech. Living it every day required something much greater. As the applause faded, one of the attorneys who had entered earlier quietly approached the event coordinator and handed over a sealed envelope bearing official corporate documents. The coordinator looked surprised, then nodded respectfully before walking toward the side of the stage. Logan noticed the movement first. His confident smile briefly faded as he exchanged a puzzled glance with his father. Richard continued speaking, assuming the interruption involved another routine schedule adjustment. Claire calmly picked up another tray of coffee cups and resumed serving the nearest table without changing her expression. The room remained filled with laughter, elegant music, and expensive celebration. But beneath that polished surface, a new chapter had already begun, moving toward the stage one quiet step at a time, carrying documents powerful enough to transform the future of every person inside the ballroom. The event coordinator approached the stage with measured steps, holding the sealed envelope carefully in both hands as though he understood its importance without fully knowing its contents. Richard Harrison paused only briefly, accepting the envelope with the confident smile of a man accustomed to receiving unexpected messages during public events. "Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a light laugh. It seems business never takes an evening off. The audience responded with polite laughter while photographers continued capturing every moment. Richard casually broke the seal and unfolded the first document, expecting another congratulatory letter or perhaps an announcement from one of the evening's sponsors. Instead, his eyes slowed across the page. The smile remained on his face for only a moment before quietly fading. Logan Harrison noticed the change immediately. "Everything all right, Dad?" he asked from the front row. Richard did not answer at first. He turned to the second page, then the third, reading each line more carefully than the last. Victoria Harrison leaned slightly forward in her chair, her composed expression beginning to tighten with concern. The ballroom gradually became quieter as guests sensed the subtle shift unfolding on stage. Richard finally looked toward the event coordinator. "Who delivered these?" he asked calmly. "Two attorneys, sir," the coordinator replied respectfully. "They requested that you receive the documents immediately following your remarks." Before Richard could respond, the ballroom doors opened once again. The two attorneys entered together, dressed in dark tailored suits, carrying slim leather document cases. Their pace was unhurried and professional. They walked directly toward the front of the room while conversations faded into complete silence. Claire Jackson continued serving coffee only a few tables away. She placed a fresh cup before an elderly guest, thanked him politely, and collected an empty dessert plate with the same steady hands she had shown throughout the evening. She never looked toward the attorneys, although she recognized every step they took. Months of confidential meetings had taught them all the value of discipline. One of the attorneys reached the stage and respectfully addressed Richard. "Mr. Harrison, we apologize for the interruption. However, under the terms of today's completed transaction, the board requested immediate notification." Richard folded the documents carefully. "What transaction?" he asked. The attorney answered with quiet professionalism. "The controlling interest in Harrison Industries has officially been transferred. All regulatory approvals have been completed, all financial settlements have cleared, and the board has acknowledged the change in ownership effective immediately." A wave of whispers swept across the ballroom like wind moving through autumn leaves. Investors exchanged confused glances. Reporters instinctively reached for their cameras. Logan stood so quickly that his chair slid backward across the polished marble floor. "That is impossible," he said. "Our legal department would have informed us." The attorney remained composed. The acquisition was conducted through multiple institutional transactions over an extended period, all in accordance with federal regulations and shareholder requirements. Richard's expression remained controlled, but his eyes returned to the documents in his hands. Every signature was authentic. Every approval carried official certification. Every page confirmed the same undeniable reality. Harrison Industries no longer belonged to the Harrison family. Victoria quietly whispered, "Who purchased the company?" Several guests repeated the same question almost simultaneously. The attorney glanced briefly toward his colleague before opening the final document inside his leather case. "The acquiring entity is Jackson Capital Holdings," he announced clearly. The name meant almost nothing to most people in the ballroom. Several investors searched their memories, trying to identify the investment firm. Logan frowned. "Who owns Jackson Capital Holdings?" he demanded. The attorney looked across the ballroom, allowing his eyes to settle on the quiet waitress who had just finished placing another coffee cup onto a nearby table. Claire gently set the silver serving tray onto the service station beside her. She smoothed the front of her black apron, thanked the elderly guest she had just served with a warm smile, and slowly turned toward the stage. For the first time that evening, every person inside the Grand Regent Hotel stopped looking at the Harrison family and began looking at the woman they had barely noticed all night. The attorney allowed the silence to linger for only a moment before speaking again. "The sole owner and managing partner of Jackson Capital Holdings is Ms. Claire Jackson." His words settled over the ballroom with astonishing weight. Nobody moved. Nobody applauded. Even the soft piano music stopped as the musicians quietly lowered their hands from their instruments. Every eye followed Claire as she stood beside the service station, wearing the same neatly pressed black uniform and carefully tied black apron she had worn throughout the evening. She neither hurried nor hesitated. She simply walked toward the stage with calm, measured steps, her posture straight and her expression unchanged. Richard Harrison stared at her as though the room itself had shifted beneath his feet. Logan Harrison looked from Claire to the attorneys and back again, searching for some sign that the announcement was a misunderstanding. Victoria Harrison remained seated, her hands resting silently on the table as disbelief slowly replaced confidence. Claire reached the front of the ballroom and offered a polite smile to the event coordinator before stepping onto the stage. One of the attorneys respectfully handed her a leather portfolio. She accepted it with a quiet nod and thanked him before turning toward the audience. No dramatic music filled the room. No triumphant celebration interrupted the silence. There was only the quiet realization spreading from one table to another that the woman almost everyone had overlooked all evening had become the new owner of Harrison Industries before the gala had even begun. Reporters quickly lowered their cameras for a brief moment, almost uncertain whether they were witnessing a corporate announcement or a lesson about human nature. Several investors exchanged stunned glances while members of the board slowly rose from their seats. One after another, they walked toward Claire and greeted her with professional handshakes. "Congratulations, Ms. Jackson," the first director said warmly. "We look forward to working with you." Another board member smiled respectfully. "Your vision for the company's future impressed every member of the acquisition committee." Those simple greetings transformed the atmosphere inside the ballroom more powerfully than any speech could have. Only minutes earlier, Claire had been treated as though she barely belonged in the room. Now some of the country's most respected executives stood patiently waiting to welcome her as their new chairwoman. Richard remained silent. His eyes followed every handshake, every respectful introduction, every quiet acknowledgement of Claire's new role. He was not witnessing strangers pretending to admire her because of sudden wealth. These people already knew her. They had negotiated with her. They had trusted her judgment long before tonight's announcement. Logan finally spoke, his voice noticeably quieter than before. You were serving tables." Claire looked toward him with the same calm expression she had carried all evening. "Yes," she answered gently. "I was." Logan struggled to understand. "Why?" Claire's answer came without hesitation. "Because honest work never diminishes a person. It reminds us who we are." The words echoed softly across the ballroom. No accusation, no bitterness, no attempt to embarrass anyone. Just a simple truth spoken with remarkable grace. Around the room, hotel employees watched with quiet pride while many guests lowered their eyes, remembering the jokes and careless remarks they had laughed at earlier in the evening. Claire had not changed in the past hour. Her title had changed. Her ownership had changed. But her character had remained exactly the same from the moment she first carried a silver tray into the ballroom until the moment she stepped onto the stage. And for the first time that evening, the wealthiest family in the room understood that the greatest difference between them and the woman they had underestimated had never been money. It had always been dignity. The ballroom remained completely silent long after the final handshake ended. The crystal chandeliers continued casting warm reflections across polished marble floors, yet the atmosphere had changed so completely that the elegant room no longer felt like the same place. Only an hour earlier, nearly everyone present had looked through Claire Jackson without truly seeing her. Now executives, investors, attorneys, and board members stood respectfully around her, waiting for her next words with the same attention they had once reserved for Richard Harrison. Claire carefully placed the leather portfolio on the podium without opening it. She looked across the audience with calm eyes that carried neither triumph nor resentment. Her voice remained gentle, steady, and remarkably composed. "Thank you for your professionalism," she said to the board members before turning toward the guests. "Tonight has been unexpected for many people, and I appreciate the respect you have shown during this transition." There was no celebration in her tone, no attempt to enjoy the discomfort surrounding the Harrison family. Richard Harrison slowly rose from his chair and walked toward the stage. Every camera followed him. Every conversation disappeared once again. He stopped several feet from Claire, maintaining the dignity that had defined his career even as the reality before him continued settling into place. "I have one question," he said quietly. Claire nodded. "Of course." Richard looked directly at her. "If you had already completed the acquisition before tonight, why were you serving tables?" Claire smiled softly. "Because I made a commitment to the hotel weeks ago, and I believe commitments should be honored." The simplicity of her answer seemed to surprise everyone even more than the acquisition itself. Richard studied her face for several seconds before speaking again. You could have canceled. Claire nodded gently. I could have. But my position changed this afternoon. My values did not. Those words settled over the room with remarkable weight. Several hotel employees exchanged emotional glances while the young dishwasher Claire had encouraged earlier quietly smiled to himself. One elderly investor lowered his head thoughtfully and whispered to the executive beside him. That is leadership. The executive answered with a slow nod. Not because she bought the company, because she kept her word. Logan Harrison remained near the front row, still trying to understand everything that had happened. Earlier that evening, he had dismissed Claire with a casual wave of his hand. Now he found himself remembering every conversation, every careless remark, every assumption he had made without knowing the person standing in front of him. Victoria Harrison quietly approached the stage as well. Her elegant confidence had softened into thoughtful reflection. Did you ever intend to tell us who you were? She asked sincerely. Claire answered without hesitation. I never hid who I was. I simply never believed my title should introduce me before my character did. Around the ballroom, reporters continued recording every word, yet nobody interrupted. The silence itself had become part of the story. One board member stepped forward and addressed the audience. For those who may not know, Ms. Jackson personally requested that every current employee be retained throughout this ownership transition unless performance reviews demonstrated otherwise. She also instructed our legal team to protect existing retirement benefits and preserve every educational assistance program. A quiet murmur spread through the ballroom. Several managers exchanged surprised expressions. Claire had not only purchased the company, she had already been thinking about the people whose lives depended upon it. Richard listened carefully before taking one slow breath. He looked around the room that had applauded him only minutes earlier, then back toward the woman he had underestimated because of a uniform and an apron. In that moment, he understood that true authority was never measured by the chair someone occupied or the wealth attached to their name. It was measured by the quiet choices they made when nobody believed they were important. And Claire Jackson had been making those choices long before anyone in the ballroom realized she owned the future they had come to celebrate. Claire Jackson stood quietly behind the podium as the last whisper faded into silence. She did not reach for the microphone immediately. Instead, she looked across the ballroom, meeting the eyes of executives, hotel employees, reporters, board members, and investors with the same calm expression that had never left her face throughout the evening. The crystal chandeliers reflected softly across the polished marble floor, while every guest waited to hear the first official words from the new owner of Harrison Industries. Claire finally spoke. I know tonight has surprised many people. Change often arrives that way. Quietly at first, then all at once. Her voice remained warm and measured, carrying naturally through the ballroom without the need for dramatic emphasis. I did not pursue this acquisition to embarrass anyone. Companies are not trophies. They are responsibilities. Several members of the board exchanged approving glances. Reporters lowered their cameras slightly, realizing they were witnessing something far different from the corporate confrontation they had expected. Claire continued, the people who build a company are not only the names printed on annual reports. They are the engineers who solve impossible problems, the receptionists who welcome every visitor, the custodians who arrive before sunrise, the servers who make guests feel respected, and every employee whose work is rarely noticed but always matters. Around the ballroom, several hotel employees looked at one another with quiet emotion. The young dishwasher who had spoken with Claire earlier smiled proudly, while the elderly janitor gently folded his hands in front of him. Richard Harrison listened without interruption. For the first time in many years, he found himself hearing leadership described in a language that quarterly reports could never measure. Claire looked toward the Harrison family before continuing. Success should never give us permission to forget the dignity of another person. Titles change. Wealth changes. Ownership changes. Character is the only thing that remains when everything else changes. The words settled deeply across the room. Logan Harrison lowered his eyes, replaying every careless remark he had made earlier that evening. Victoria Harrison quietly removed the diamond bracelet from her wrist and held it loosely in her hand. Her thoughts no longer focused on appearances, but on the lesson unfolding before everyone. One senior board member stepped forward with a folder containing the first executive resolutions awaiting Claire's signature. She accepted the folder but did not open it immediately. "Before we discuss business," she said, "there is one policy I want implemented on my first day." The room became completely still once again. Every employee, regardless of position, will participate in leadership development opportunities if they choose. Talent should never be overlooked because of a uniform, a job title, or an assumption. Several executives nodded almost immediately. One investor quietly whispered that the decision would strengthen the company far beyond any financial restructuring. Another simply smiled, recognizing that culture often determined long-term success more than strategy alone. Claire signed the first document with calm precision before handing it back to the board member. There was no applause yet, only thoughtful silence. Then Richard Harrison slowly began clapping. The sound echoed alone for a brief moment before others joined him. Soon the entire ballroom stood together, not celebrating a business transaction, but honoring a vision built on respect instead of pride. Claire acknowledged the applause with a gracious nod before stepping away from the podium. She did not appear victorious. She appeared responsible. In that quiet moment, everyone inside the Grand Regent Hotel understood that the company had gained far more than a new owner. It had gained a leader who believed that every person deserved to be seen before they were judged, and that belief would become the strongest foundation Harrison Industries had ever known. The applause gradually softened until the ballroom returned to a peaceful silence. But the meaning behind those final moments remained with everyone who had witnessed them. Claire Jackson quietly stepped away from the podium and thanked each board member, attorney, and hotel employee with the same sincerity she had shown throughout the evening. She did not ask for a special escort. She did not request a private celebration. Instead, she walked toward the service station where her neatly folded server's jacket still rested beside the silver trays she had been carrying only an hour earlier. She carefully removed the black apron, folded it with respect, and placed it beside the uniform before thanking her manager for allowing her to finish the shift she had promised to complete. The manager stood speechless for several seconds before finally smiling. "I have never been prouder to work beside someone," he said quietly. Claire answered with a warm smile. "Neither titles nor companies make people worthy of respect. We simply choose whether to show it." Nearby, the young dishwasher and the elderly janitor applauded softly, joined by several members of the hotel staff who had spent years working behind the scenes without expecting recognition. Richard Harrison slowly approached Claire with Victoria and Logan beside him. There were no cameras close enough to capture every word, yet many guests instinctively gave them space, understanding that some conversations deserved privacy. Richard extended his hand with genuine humility. "Ms. Jackson," he began, "I cannot change what happened earlier this evening, but I can acknowledge it honestly. I judged you before I knew you, and that was my failure, not yours." Claire accepted his handshake without hesitation. "Thank you," she replied gently. The willingness to admit a mistake is where respect begins. Logan lowered his eyes before speaking. "I confused a uniform with a person's worth. I will remember this for the rest of my life." Claire smiled kindly. "Then tonight has already accomplished something valuable." Victoria quietly nodded in agreement, her expression carrying gratitude instead of pride. Over the following months, Harrison Industries changed in ways that could be measured not only through financial reports, but through everyday experiences. Leadership training became available to employees at every level. Scholarship programs expanded for workers and their families. Anonymous idea submissions from factory employees, receptionists, custodians, technicians, and administrative staff became part of executive meetings because Claire believed good ideas never belonged to job titles alone. Employee satisfaction steadily increased, collaboration strengthened across departments, and industry analysts praised the company's renewed culture of respect and innovation. Richard Harrison accepted an advisory role during the transition, offering decades of experience while supporting the new leadership with professionalism and grace. Logan chose to remain with the company as well, determined to earn trust through humility rather than inheritance. Years later, visitors entering Harrison Industries headquarters often paused before a simple framed photograph displayed in the main lobby. It showed no corporate logo, no executive portrait, and no stock market milestone. Instead, It captured a quiet moment from that unforgettable evening. A black waitress in a neatly pressed uniform shaking hands with the family who had once underestimated her. Beneath the photograph rested a single inscription engraved in polished brass. The way you treat people before you know their story reveals your own. Employees passed those words every morning on their way to work. Some smiled. Others paused for a moment of reflection. New hires often asked about the photograph, and longtime employees always answered with the same quiet pride. They explained that the company had become stronger on the day everyone stopped measuring value by appearance and started recognizing character instead. Because fortunes can rise and fall, companies can be bought and sold, and titles can change without warning, but dignity remains priceless. Respect given freely will always outlast power claimed through status, and the greatest leaders are remembered not for the wealth they control, but for the humanity they choose to show every single day.